Hey guys, Leo here, and today I'm going to be talking about a really important question. How does society determine if an action is morally right or wrong, and what factors influence this decision? In order to do this, I'm going to be looking at the literary works that we've read this semester in English class: As I Lay Dying, Slaughterhouse-Five, Night, Catcher in the Rye, A Separate Peace, and A Good Man Is Hard to Find. I'm going to be analyzing the characters and figuring out what they did, if it's morally right or wrong, and how society reacted. In Night, by Elie Wiesel, Eliezer is forced to grow up quickly due to the predicament that he is in. This causes him to make rash decisions. He usually has good intentions with these decisions, but occasionally they have a negative outcome. For example, when Eliezer sees Stein, his cousin, Stein asks how his wife and kids are doing. Eliezer replies by saying, "Rizal is fine, so are the children." Unfortunately, this has a negative effect, because later it says, talking about Stein, "He left. We never saw him again. He had been given the news, the real news." Eliezer's good intentions had a negative effect on Stein, even though he didn't mean for him to be bad. So this brings up a really important question. If you have good intentions, but it ends up backfiring, does that make it morally right or morally wrong? I would say that he was wrong for telling that white lie to Stan, because even though he just did it to make him feel better, it actually just gave him false hope, and it hurt him in the long run. And I think Elie experiences that as a narrator as he looks back, because he felt that himself. He felt that false hope. For example, he felt it with God. He says he no longer accepts God's silence. Elie saying this was looked down upon by a lot of people in that society, kind of in the concentration camp, because a lot of people were kind of doing the opposite. They were trying to pray to God and get him to help them, but Eliezer instead just blamed all of his problems on God. And this did end up hurting him in the long run, because the people with faith, they had something to live for, and he kind of had nothing to live for, which he explains in the end. He looks in the mirror and sees that he's just skin and bones, and he's just a ghost of his former self. Later in the book, Eliezer again does something he ends up regretting, and it's not necessarily bad. So he kind of abandons his father a little bit when his father is being beaten and killed. And his father's dying, and he's kind of asking for Eliezer. He kind of needs that comfort, and Eliezer kind of doesn't acknowledge him, and that's in his father's time of need. So he looks back as a narrator and explains that a little bit. He says, "His last word had been my name. He had called out to me, and I had not answered." So he regrets doing this. He thinks of it as wrong. And in his own mental state, that would be morally wrong. But from our point of view as a reader, we see that that was probably the right choice for him to do, because it might have saved his life, possibly, because if he had retaliated against the guards and tried to save his father's life, Eliezer himself could have been killed. In John Noel's A Separate Peace, the main character, Jean, really becomes enlightened throughout the novel. Towards the beginning of the book, he pushes his best friend Finney out of the tree, and throughout the rest of the book, Noel's kind of establishes him as this symbol to show his innate evil, that evil that is within everyone, actually. And he's showing that Jean is not actually a bad person. He is just overcome by jealousy and pushes Finney by instinct. Jean is indeed ridiculed by society for doing this, that society being the other kids at his school, Devon. For example, Brinker, another student, organizes this trial to kind of prove that Jean is guilty, and that's their society, their microcosm, and they are saying that Jean is wrong. Jean actually comes to believe this. He thinks that he is a bad person, and it's not till he enlightens and he realizes that it's that evil within himself that came out and pushed Finney out of the tree. He's not a bad person in and of himself. And he comes to this conclusion when he says, "That night I slept easily, and it was only on waking up that this illusion was gone, and I was confronted with myself and what I had done to Finney." So he has this enlightenment, and he understands what he did, and he is self-reflecting upon it. And he sees that it was just a bad moment for him, which kind of connects to Slaughterhouse-Five, which I'll talk about later, about how there are moments that are good and there are moments that are bad, and sometimes you may be in one moment, but you can always look back on the other one. In J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye, Holden leaves his school Pensy for kind of a free and roaming life in New York. A big question that pops up when you're reading this is, should you follow your path or should you follow the path that is given to you? Well, Holden decides to follow his own path. He quits school and disregards everything his parents and his teachers are telling him and tries to discover himself. While doing so, he gets thrust into the adult world. Though he does learn to mature and grow, it is at the cost of his innocence, and it is a very sudden thing that happens, and that is opposite to what should happen, which is easing into the adult world, kind of becoming accustomed to it instead of just being thrust into it, though it was out of Holden's own choice to do so. There's definitely proof of Holden maturing throughout the novel. For example, at the end, when he's with Phoebe at the park, and she's riding the merry-go-round, he says, "I was sort of afraid she'd fall off the goddamn horse, but I didn't say anything or do anything." The thing with kids is, if they want to grab for the gold ring, you have to let them do it, and not say anything. So, Holden, in a way, again, just like Jean, he's self-reflecting, and that's how you have to mature. You have to look at yourself, look at your morals, say, what am I doing that's right, what am I doing that's wrong? And Holden did that, and this is kind of a way of him entering adulthood. He's looking back upon himself, which he sees in Phoebe. He sees that kid grabbing for the golden ring, and he's like, hey, that used to be me, that was me, I was grabbing for that golden ring. And he knows that it's in vain because she's not going to get it. Just like him, he knows it's not going to be like an easy transition into the adult world. He knows that now once he's in the adult world. He didn't know that then. In As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner, the Bundren family is on an absurd journey to bury the dead mother, Addie Bundren. Addie's second oldest son, Darrell, seems to be the only sane one around there, though he is labeled as insane. He is sane because he is the only one trying to help his mother. He's trying to progress for the better instead of lingering in the past. Darrell does some things that he is labeled crazy for and morally bad. And I would kind of have to agree with this a little, but it really is a matter of perspective. For example, Darrell burns down a barn that his mother's coffin is, just so her body can be put to rest. It's not his barn, and even if it was his barn, that just sounds like a crazy act, burning it down no matter what the reason is for. But from Darrell's point of view, he's just trying to help his mother. So again, just like Eliezer, he has good intentions, but he just may be executing it the wrong way. Darrell may seem crazy for burning down the barn, but it's really just society that labels him as crazy, and he kind of takes on that persona, just like the misfit in A Good Man is Hard to Find, which I'll get to later. Cash, Addie Bundren's oldest son, goes on to say, "It's like it ain't so much what a fellow does, but it's the way the majority of folks is looking at him when he does it." Cash brings up a great point in how perspective plays a huge role in determining what is right and what is wrong. Again, some people may see Darrell's actions as wrong, but Cash understands that in his perspective, it is right. So Cash is kind of like Darrell in the sense that he's all-seeing, and he can kind of look into people and understand that. Even though he does think different from Darrell, he shares that quality with him that he can step in someone else's shoes and see what they're seeing. In A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor, the grandma is a very interesting character. Some may see her as a symbol of corruption, while others a deity. Yet, the grandma is, in a way, both of these. This because she shows in the short story that she can be a hypocrite at times. For example, she's trying to help the misfit and tell him to be good, and she's trying to help the family, and she kind of has this standard like she's a mediator, like at the end when she's looking down upon the misfit. And she thinks that she's like above people, yet she really isn't, because when she realizes that the family actually went on the wrong path, she doesn't tell them, and that kind of shows that she kind of embarrassed to show her faults, but they definitely are there. The grandma has a moment of grace at the end of the short story when she reaches out her hand to the misfit. Unfortunately for the grandma's sake, the misfit decides not to take this chance for grace, and this is actually evident in a lot of O'Connor's short stories. For example, in The Life You Save May Be Your Own, Shiflet is also presented with this chance for grace. He has a chance to make something of himself and be in this family with Helga, and her mother would love it too. It's like kind of a win-win for everyone. But instead he chooses the bad path, and which is to steal their car and leave. Very similar to what the misfit does, which is reject the grandmother's grace. Another important question to talk about when you're reading A Good Man is Hard to Find is whether or not the misfit is 100% bad. Well, I would have to say no. because I think society really kind of puts this pressure on him to be bad, because he doesn't even remember what he did. He just knows that society tells him he's bad, so he is bad. He says, "I forget what I done, lady. I sat there and I sat there trying to remember what I done, and I ain't recalled it to this day. Once in a while I could think it was coming to me, but it never come." Another thing that shows that the misfit is not 100% bad is that he really doesn't enjoy killing the grandma. For example, he says, "Shut up, Bobby Lee," that's his accomplice. "It's no real pleasure in life," and he's talking about when he had to kill the grandma. So it's not something that he enjoys, it's just something he has to do. It's like a task that was imposed on him by society. It's kind of like he regrets doing it. He has no choice in the matter. In Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut, there is not much talk of morals by the Tralfamendorians, and that is because there's really no room for that in their beliefs. Why would you have any need for morals when all your actions are predestined? For example, the Tralfamendorian books. There isn't any particular relationship between the messages. There's no beginning, no middle, no end, no suspense, no moral. When a human reads the book, like Billy Pilgrim, they cannot understand it because we're programmed to have this idea that time is linear. We are born with this moral compass that helps us kind of direct our life based on how it goes. And the Tralfamendorians don't have this, and because of their view of time, there's really no need for that moral compass. Although the Tralfamendorians themselves don't convey this moral message, there is quite a strong message of anti-war within the novel. For example, Billy's coat. It was much too small for Billy. It had a fur collar and a lining of crimson silk, and had apparently been made for an imperial about as big as an organ grinder's monkey. It was full of bullet holes. This description of Billy's coat kind of gives you an image in your mind of it being childish. First of all, being too small and being ripped, it's like a kid's supposed to be wearing it. And what that's showing is we're trying to fight a war with children, and it's just not going to work. War is again acquainted with children when Vonnegut imagined dropping bombs on the town. He sees the little lights and seems playful about dropping the bombs. Vonnegut is saying that society is trying to desensitize children to the war. Vonnegut says, "I imagine dropping bombs on those lights, those villages and cities and towns." Vonnegut believes that by putting children in war, we're altering their mindset, making them think more violently, which is why he kind of imagines dropping these bombs. So they're trying to desensitize these children to the war. This is kind of like a separate piece, because in a separate piece, the school is trying to acquaint the children with the war and, again, desensitize them so that they don't feel disconnected with what's going on during the war. In both novels, they're saying the same thing about how our society is trying to glamorize war and make it not as big of a deal when it really is a big deal. It's people dying. In Night, a separate piece, Catcher in the Rye, As I Lay Dying, A Good Man is Hard to Find, and Slaughterhouse-Five, morality is brought up as a huge topic. They're talking about what is right and what is wrong, and how does society view this? What influence does it have on us? The novels show that society shapes our identity and we become what society wants us to become. When debating what is right and what is wrong, it's all about perspective. In one person's perspective, something may be right, and in another's, it's may be wrong. The only way to get a true sense of morals is to develop it for yourself without the influence of society.